The rain on Scalemount Ridge did not fall softly. It came down in cold, heavy sheets that turned the stone paths into rivers and made the torches above the Stonewing Gate hiss and sputter. Ryle walked up that path with his wings folded tight against his back, his left one tucked a little closer than his right, because it always ached in the cold. He had been walking for 3 months to reach this gate. He did not let himself think about that too hard. The Stonewing clan was the oldest of the dragon clans. Their territory sat at the highest point of the Scalemount reaches, which meant the air was thin, and the elders who lived there believed that the altitude itself proved their worth. Ryle had heard stories about them growing up. Every young dragon had. The Stonewing was strict, yes, but they were also fair. That was what the stories said. He held onto that word as he climbed. Fair, just give him a fair look. The gate guards did not speak to him. They looked him over from top to tail, took note of his size, took note of his left wing, and sent a runner inside. Then they told him to wait in the rain. He waited. He was small for his age, not by a little, by the kind of margin that made other dragons pause when they saw him, as if they were waiting for the rest of him to appear from somewhere behind a corner. His scales were a deep grey blue, which was fine, that was a normal color. His eyes were amber, which was also fine. But his body was lean where it should have been broad, and his wingspan, when he opened his wings fully, reached only as far as a dragon 4 years younger than him. His fire was real. He could breathe flame. It just was not the roaring column of heat that the clan tests required. It was a short, hot, controlled thing. It burned what he aimed it at. It just did not fill a canyon. The elders came out an hour later, 3 of them, wrapped in heavy scaled robes, led by Elder Voss. Voss was enormous. His neck alone was the width of a young tree trunk. He looked at Ryle the way a builder looks at a cracked stone, deciding if it is worth keeping or better used as gravel. The reckoning was a formal ritual. Ryle had studied it. He knew what to do. He stood straight, opened his wings on command, breathed fire on command, pressed his scales to the measurement frame when they asked. He did every part of it without flinching. The numbers came back wrong. His wingspan was 40% below the minimum. His flame temperature was within range, but his pressure output was not. His left wing showed structural irregularity. Voss read the results out loud, not to Ryle, to the small crowd of Stonewing clan members who had gathered under the covered walkway to watch. He used the word hollowborn. It was not a common word anymore, but everyone present understood it. It meant a dragon body that did not carry a dragon's value inside it. Ryle asked when Voss finished what he could do to earn a place in the clan. His voice was steady. He was proud of that. One of the younger clan members, standing nearby, laughed. He said something about the left wing, something that got a few more laughs from the group under the walkway. Ryle did not look at him. He kept his eyes on Voss. Voss said there was nothing to be done. Clan membership required passing the reckoning. He had not passed. The gate would remain closed to him. Ryle dipped his head in the formal way, said thank you for the evaluation, turned around, and walked back down the wet stone path. He did not run, he walked, slowly, steadily in the rain, until the Stonewing Gate was out of sight behind him. He sat under an overhang of rock for a while and let himself breathe. Then he got up and started walking toward Ashfang territory. The Ashfang clan was different from Stonewing. Where Stonewing valued tradition, Ashfang valued function. They were traders, negotiators, the clan most likely to deal with other species across the galactic border. Ryle thought this might work in his favor. He was a good listener. He was careful with language. He had taught himself 3 non-dragon trade languages in his spare time using cracked old data slates. Surely a clan that valued function would see the function in that. Elder Ritha received him on the 3rd day after his arrival. She was sleek, older, with burnt copper scales and sharp eyes that moved around a room even when her head was still. She did not take him to a formal reckoning. She took him to a sitting room, gave him warm food, and asked him questions for 2 hours. Ryle answered everything honestly. His age, his history, his skills, his limitations. He told her about Stonewing. She did not seem surprised. She said that Stonewing was behind the times, that size was not the measure of usefulness, that the Ashfang valued contribution over appearance. For 3 weeks, Ryle contributed. He ran messages between Ashfang substations because his size let him move through corridors and passage points that larger dragons could not easily navigate. He translated trade documents from 2 of the languages he knew. He helped 3 different HFY members prepare for meetings with off-world clients by practicing negotiation phrases with them in the evenings. He was good at it. He knew he was good at it. Then the Ironscale clan sent a formal alliance offer to HFY. It was a large offer, one that would reshape the trade routes across the reaches. Ironscale had one condition. They did not want any clanless or irregular dragons associated with HFY's leadership structure. It complicated the image they wished to project. Ritha called Ryle in on a quiet morning. She did not apologize. She used the word irregular 4 times. She said the timing was unfortunate. She said she hoped he would find his place elsewhere. 2 guards walked him to the border and waited until he crossed it. He stood on the far side of the HFY border in the early morning and looked back at nothing. He went to Ironscale third because there was no 4th option on his list. He did not even reach the inner gate. Elder Dran was near the outer wall when Ryle arrived, inspecting something on the wall's surface with 2 advisors. One of the advisors saw Ryle coming up the road and said something quietly to Dran. Dran turned, looked at Ryle from a distance of about 30 steps and said, "We know who you are." No. The outer gate closed. Ryle stood there for 2 days. He was not sure why. He did not expect the gate to open. He sat in the dry grass outside the Ironscale wall and looked up at the sky above the reaches for a long time. The sky out here was wide, wider than any territory, wider than any gate. It went in every direction without asking anyone's permission. On the 3rd morning, he got up, packed his small bag, clicked his cracked translation pendant around his neck, and walked to the public transit platform at the base of the Scalemount Road. He found the cheapest available berth on a freight platform heading toward neutral galactic space. He paid for it with the last of the credits he had saved over 2 years doing small work around the border towns. He did not look back at the reaches as the platform lifted. He was done looking back. The galaxy was very large. Somewhere in it, there had to be a place that would not decide his worth before it knew his name. He folded his wings, tucked the left one close against his side, and watched the Scalemount Mountains disappear into the clouds below him. There is a particular kind of quiet that lives in places built entirely for moving on. Tarval 9 was that kind of place. It was a mid-tier waypoint station, the sort that showed up on trade maps only because something had to connect the cheaper routes between the inner systems and the outer ones. Its corridors smelled like coolant fluid and old food, and the particular mix of 100 different species all passing through without stopping long enough to make the place theirs. Nobody came to Tarval 9 to stay. They came to refuel, restock, reroute, and leave. Ryle arrived on a Tuesday, which meant nothing to him but was recorded in the station's entry log along with his species, his approximate mass, and a flag on his file that read, "Clanless. No affiliation. No flags on the file were ever good." This one was the kind that made security officers glance up twice when you walked past. He found a bunk in a lower-deck rest station for 3 nights using the last of his secondary credit reserve, which he had kept separate from the transit payment, a small habit of caution he had carried since leaving the reaches. He used those 3 days to learn the station. He walked every public deck. He read the job postings on every board. He listened to what people said in the eating areas and the corridors. He had always learned best by watching first. The lower docks were where the work was, not the official work. Kind with contracts and ID verification and permanent resident status requirements. The real work. The dock crews who needed extra hands for loading shifts, the traders who needed cargo moved fast and did not want to pay the port authorities handling fees, the repair teams who needed someone with a strong back and no particular attachment to standard labor hours. This work paid in credits, dropped directly into a hand, no record, no paperwork. It suited Ryle exactly. His strength was the one thing no one could argue with. He could lift a full freight crate single-handed, the kind that normally required a loading machine or 3 large workers. Word moved around the lower docks, the way word always moves in small working communities, quietly and thoroughly, and within a week Ryle had more loading work than his hours could fit. He took every shift that was offered. He did not complain about the stairs. He did not react to the vendors who moved their goods when he walked past, or the families who shifted away from him in the common eating areas, or the security officer who spent an hour following him one afternoon before getting called away to something else. He just worked. 6 weeks passed like this. He was on a mid-morning loading shift on Dock 14 when the loading arm on berth 7 malfunctioned. The arm was old, the kind of equipment that dock managers kept patching instead of replacing because new arms cost more than the liability paperwork for the old ones. It seized mid-swing with a full freight crate locked in its grip, and then the lock gave way. The crate dropped. It was directly above a dock worker named Pell, a small Grethani man who was checking his manifest on a handheld reader and had not looked up. Ryle caught it. He crossed the distance in 2 steps and put both hands under the crate before it reached the halfway point of its fall. The weight drove him down to one knee on the dock floor. His left wing snapped out instinctively for balance, which sent a bright spike of pain through the joint, and he absorbed it and held the crate steady until 2 other dock workers got a rolling brace under it and he could set it down. Pell stood where he was for a moment, looking at the crate, looking at Ryle, looking at the space where the crate would have landed on him. Then he said something in Grethani that Ryle's pendant translated as a general expression of extreme gratitude directed at the universe. From the cockpit window of the ship in berth 7, a human had watched all of this happen. The ship was called the Sable Heron. It was a mid-class independent cargo hauler, the kind of vessel that had been patched and repatched so many times that it had become something almost original, a collection of decisions made under budget pressure over many years. It was not beautiful. It worked. There was a difference, and the Sable Heron knew which side of it the ship was on. The human who walked down the loading ramp was called Darren. He was not tall for a human, which meant he came up to roughly the middle of Ryle's chest. He had dark skin, short gray at his temples, and the particular posture of someone who spent most of their life in confined spaces, not stooped, but compressed, held inward. He wore a cargo jacket with a dock authority patch half peeled off one shoulder, which suggested he had once had a dock authority relationship that had since become complicated. He walked up to Ryle, looked at him for a moment that was long enough to be a real look and not just a glance, and said, "You want a job?" Ryle said yes before Darren finished the sentence. Darren walked him up the ramp. The inside of the Sable Heron was exactly what the outside suggested, functional, organized in a way that made sense to the people who lived in it and would confuse everyone else. There were tools mounted on walls in a specific order that meant something. There were storage drawers labeled in at least 3 languages. The corridor from the ramp to the main cabin was narrow enough that Ryle had to walk it sideways, wings completely flat. Sierra was in the cockpit. She was Velthari, which meant she had 4 arms, pale gray skin, and the kind of eyes that did not have visible pupils, just a solid dark amber that reflected light. She was good at her job. Ryle could tell that immediately from the way the cockpit looked, organized and adapted and personal in the way that spaces only get when someone has cared about them for a long time. She turned around, saw Ryle, and said, in a flat and unhurried voice, "No." Darren said her name. She held up 2 of her 4 hands. "I have reasons." She did have reasons. She listed them. 17 by Ryle's count, though a few overlapped. They included: the cargo bays were already calibrated for standard freight weight distribution, and a Dragon's body would disrupt that. The ship's customs profile would take a significant hit at every inspection point. Clients in at least 4 of their current trade routes would cancel contracts on site. The hull ventilation was not rated for sustained body heat above a certain threshold. The translation systems would need updating, and the rear bunk was designed for a species with a horizontal spine. Darren listened to all 17 reasons. He nodded at each one. When she finished, he said, "Noted." Then he looked at Ryle and said the rear cargo bunk was available if he could manage the wing situation. Ryle said he could manage. Sierra made a sound that was not agreement, but was also not any further argument, which Ryle had already learned to recognize as a particular kind of door left open. The first run was a medical supply delivery to a Grethani colony 3 standard days out. Ryle spent most of it learning the ship. He moved carefully. He asked before touching anything. He ate in the cargo bay so as not to crowd the small common area. Halfway through the second day, a coolant line in the secondary engine housing started losing pressure. Darren and Sierra needed both their pairs of hands on the manual rerouting panel, and the problem was that someone also needed to hold the pressure coupling on the far side of the housing steady while they worked. The housing gap was too narrow for either of them to reach through with a tool. Ryle put his tail through the gap, located the coupling by touch, and held it exactly steady for 22 minutes while Darren and Sierra finished the reroute. When it was done, Sierra looked at the gap, looked at the tail, and said nothing, but she stopped listing reasons after that. On the third night, Ryle lay in the cargo bunk, which was indeed too short, his tail curled up along the wall beside him and his wings folded so tightly they ached a little. The ship hummed around him in the specific low-frequency way that engines hum when they are well-maintained. It was not a quiet sound, but it was a steady one. He had not felt somewhere allowed to be in a long time. It was a small thing to feel. He let himself feel it anyway. There is a kind of trust that does not announce itself. It does not arrive in a single moment with something to point to. It builds the way sediment builds at the bottom of a river, slowly, layer by layer, until one day the riverbed is entirely different from what it used to be, and nobody can say exactly when the change happened. 3 months passed aboard the Sable Heron. In that time, Ryle ran cargo from 9 different loading points to 14 different destinations, repaired a secondary fuel relay using his tail and 2 of his claws because the access panel was behind a wall joint that no standard tool could reach, learned how Sierra liked her cockpit temperature set in the mornings and adjusted the rear vents accordingly without being asked, and figured out that Darren took his navigation shifts more seriously when there was something warm to drink nearby. So Ryle started putting a covered cup outside the cockpit door at the start of every long-haul leg. Darren noticed the wing. He noticed it the way practical people notice things, not with a comment, but with attention. He saw the way the left wing sat lower at rest. He saw the small adjustment Ryle made when he shifted his weight in tight corridors. He did not say anything for about 2 weeks. Then one evening, when Ryle was doing a post-landing checklist on the cargo bay doors, Darren came in and sat on a crate and asked, in the same tone he used for engine questions, whether the wing caused pain or just moved differently. Ryle stopped the checklist. He said it was a birth defect in the joint structure. He said it caused some pain in cold temperatures and when the wing was held in one position for too long. He said it had always been that way. Darren asked if anything helped. Ryle said support helped. Bracing the joint took the pressure off the surrounding tissue. He had used improvised wraps before, but nothing purpose-made, because those required a medical port and a Velthari specialist and were not cheap. Darren said he understood, and that was the end of the conversation. 4 days later, after a supply stop at a medical transit port in the Hadrith system, Ryle found something on his cargo bunk. It was a Velthari wing brace, proper grade, fitted for a mid-size wingspan with adjustable joint brackets. It was not new. It had been purchased from a secondary medical supplier, which was where things went when they had been returned or traded in, which kept the cost reasonable. There was no note. Ryle held it for a long time. He did not say anything for 2 days. On the 3rd day, he said thank you to Darren while they were both doing maintenance on the port landing strut. Darren said sure and kept working on the strut. That was the entire conversation. It was also one of the most complete conversations Ryle had ever had. The client situation happened at a drop-off point in the Veln system, a mid-tier industrial planet with a busy private freight market. The contact was a supply manager for a processing facility. He had ordered a standard cargo of machine lubricants and had spoken with Darren twice over comms to arrange the delivery. When the Sable Heron landed and the ramp came down and Ryle walked out first to begin unloading because he could move the crates in 1/3 of the time, The supply manager saw him, took 3 steps back, and said he would not be accepting the delivery. He said it calmly and without any specific insult. He cited comfort concerns. He said he had workers on site who would be upset. He said he hoped there would be no hard feelings. Darren, standing at the top of the ramp, looked at the man for a moment. Then he said he understood and asked the man to send a formal cancellation in writing through the comms system so both parties had a record. The man said he would. Darren thanked him, told Ryle to reload, and closed the ramp. They resold the cargo at the next port for 11% less than the original contract price. When they were back in the air, Ryle said Darren had not needed to do that. He said the man had been within his legal right to cancel. He said the loss was not nothing. Darren said, "I know I didn't have to." He checked the next route calculation on the navigation display. The conversation was over. Ryle sat with that for a while. He had been prepared to hear a reason. That there had not been one, that it had simply been a decision, was something he was not sure how to hold. He held it anyway. It was Ryle who eventually asked Darren the question that had been in the back of his mind since Berth 7 on Tarvel 9. They were on a long overnight haul, nothing to do but watch the nav system and wait, and Ryle asked why Darren was not afraid of him. He explained what he meant carefully. He said that most species, when they encountered dragon physiology at close range, had an automatic stress response. The scale texture, the amber eyes, the heat of a nearby dragon body, the smell of the breath. It was not prejudice exactly, it was something older than thought. Even people who had no problem with dragons as a concept would tense up when one was close. He had watched it happen his entire life. Darren thought about it, not a short pause but a real one, the kind where thinking was actually happening and not just being performed. Then he said that his grandmother had kept bees, not small ones, a large, aggressive breed that most of the farms near her had gotten rid of because they strung workers and frightened animals and no one wanted to deal with them. Everyone told her she was out of her mind. She kept them anyway for 40 years and made the best honey in the province and sold it consistently and was never once strung because she understood what the bees were doing and why. Ryle asked what she said about them. Darren said she used to say that anything that scares people into leaving it alone usually has a good reason for it, and if you can figure out the reason, you are mostly fine. Ryle thought about that for a while. He said it was a reasonable approach to bees. Darren said it had worked out. Sierra talked to Ryle for the first time about something that was not ship business on a quiet afternoon in the common area when Darren was in the cockpit running routine systems. She sat across from Ryle with a cup of something, and she did not ask permission before starting, which was how Velthari began conversations they had already decided to have. She asked him about the clans. He told her all of it: Stonewing, Ashfang, Ironscale, the walk up the wet path, the word Hollowborn, Ritha's sitting room and her warm food and her 3 weeks of use and then her careful goodbye, the outer gate that closed before he even got close. He told it plainly, without performing sadness or anger, because he was past both at this point. It had happened. It was behind him. Sierra listened without speaking. She did not make sympathy sounds. She did not offer reassurance during any of the parts that might have called for it. She just listened until he was finished. Then she said that the clans sounded like the Velthari merchant guilds. She said the guilds measured a member's worth by what the member could produce for the guild in the current trade season. If you produced well, you were valued. If your production changed, your value changed. Simple math. She paused and looked into her cup for a moment. Then she said he was better out here. She said it the same way she said everything, without decoration, like a fact she was reporting. Ryle did not say anything back. He thought that was probably the right response. That evening, a message came through the Sable Heron's comms. It was flagged formal and routed through the Galactic Council relay system, which meant it had been sent with the kind of official weight that made communication systems treat it differently than regular traffic. It was addressed to the crew of the Sable Heron, specifically regarding the dragon currently aboard. The sender was a council diplomat named Councillor Hout. The message was polite. It expressed interest in a meeting. It said the council had become aware of Ryle's situation and believed there might be an opportunity worth discussing. It used careful language throughout. Ryle read it twice. Darren read it once, leaned back in his chair and said, "What do you want to do?" Ryle said he was not sure yet. Darren said they had a delivery stop in 3 days at a council way station anyway. They could meet the man if Ryle wanted, or they could not. Either was fine. Ryle said he would think about it. He spent the next 3 days thinking about what the word opportunity had felt like in Ritha's sitting room, and what it felt like in this message, and whether there was any difference between the two. Council Way Station, Oral existed in the kind of deliberate neutrality that cost a great deal to maintain. Every surface was clean. Every hallway was wide enough for 3 different species to walk side by side without crowding. The lighting was calibrated to be comfortable for 17 biological types. There were translation relays embedded in the walls so that conversation flowed without the awkward pauses of handheld devices. Everything about Oral said, "This is a place where important things happen, and the people who built it wanted you to know that." Ryle noticed all of it. He also noticed the way 2 other visiting species moved to the far side of the corridor when he and Darren walked through from the docking bay. He noticed the council staff member at the check-in point who asked for his identification twice, even though the pendant scanner had already confirmed it. He noticed that the sitting room they were taken to had a ceiling just barely high enough for him to stand in without his head touching it. Designed for diplomacy, but not quite designed for him. Councillor Hout was already in the room when they arrived. He stood when they entered, which was a formal gesture, and he was good at formal gestures. He was a Velanthe, a species that shared a general body plan with humans but was taller and narrower and had the kind of composed, still face that made it difficult to read small emotional signals. He was dressed well. He had the specific kind of posture that people develop when they spend a great deal of time in rooms where other people are watching them. He greeted Ryle first, which was correct protocol, and he did it in formal High Dragon, the traditional court language of the Scalemount clans. The pronunciation was precise. He had practiced it. Ryle answered in the same dialect because it would have been rude not to. And then gently shifted the conversation to universal trade tongue, because he wanted to make sure Darren could follow everything. Hout smiled at that. It was the smile of a man who had expected exactly that move. He offered refreshments. They declined. He sat. They sat. He began. The situation, as Hout described it, was both unique and historically significant. 3 dragon clans were in an active territorial dispute with 2 neighboring species over the reach boundary lines. The dispute had been ongoing for 11 years. The Galactic Council had been trying to mediate it for 9 of those 11 years with no meaningful progress. The reason, he explained, was that both sides needed a mediator that neither side could accuse of being aligned with the other. The dragon clans would not accept a non-dragon mediator. The neighboring species would not accept a clan-aligned dragon mediator. He paused there. Ryle, a dragon with no clan alignment at all, one who had been formally evaluated and rejected by 3 separate clans on record, was, from a pure structural standpoint, the only being in the known systems who could technically satisfy both requirements simultaneously. Hout used the word historic. He used it 4 times at evenly spaced points in his presentation, which told Ryle the packing had been rehearsed. The proposed role was council emissary. Ryle would travel to each party under council protection, hold formal talks, carry proposals, report back. The council would provide documentation, transport, and what Hout called resettlement assistance upon conclusion of the process, which he said would likely take between 18 months and 3 years. Ryle let him finish. Then he asked what happened to him after the process ended. Hout said there was resettlement assistance. Ryle asked what that meant in specific terms. Where would he live? Under whose authority? In what legal status? Hout said the council would ensure he was placed in an appropriate situation. Ryle asked if the council would give him a formal residency classification, a permanent one not dependent on his usefulness to the current diplomatic process. Hout said those details would be worked out in due course. Ryle asked if he was free to leave the arrangement at any point if he decided it was not working. Hout said the arrangement would involve certain commitments, given the serious nature of the diplomatic situation. Darren, who had been sitting in a chair to Ryle's left and had said nothing from the moment they walked into the room, stood up. He had been holding his jacket in his lap, and he put it on now, one arm at a time, without hurry. Then he asked one question. He asked whether Ryle was free to leave the arrangement at any point, or whether that was just not something Hout wanted to answer directly. Hout said the arrangement would involve certain commitments. Darren nodded. He looked at Ryle. Ryle looked at Hout. He looked at him for a moment that was long enough to let the man know it was a real look, not a polite one. Then he thanked Hout formally in High Dragon for his time and his consideration, used the full three-clause formal close that the old language required, and said he was not interested. Hout did not lose his composure. He was too skilled for that, but something behind his eyes adjusted. He said he was sorry to hear it, and that he hoped Ryle would think it over, and that the council would be available if he changed his mind. As Ryle and Darren moved toward the door, Hout said one more thing, quietly, as if it were a small addition and not the real point. He said that the Galactic Council maintained open communications with the Dragon Clan Council, as was standard protocol in territorial matters. He said that the council filed regular contact reports, which included information about unaffiliated dragons operating in neutral space. He said this was standard procedure and not anything he personally controlled. He did not say it was a threat. He said it in a tone that a careful listener would understand as a threat without requiring him to have said it. Ryle stopped at the door. He did not turn around. He said in the same calm, formal voice he had used throughout, "Then they will know where I am." He walked out. In the corridor, Sierra was waiting. She had not been invited to the meeting and had therefore found a bench near the docking bay connector and sat there reading technical manuals on her handheld for the past hour. She looked up when they came out and read their faces in the way that people who have worked closely together for a while learn to read faces. She said, "That could bring trouble." Ryle said he knew. They walked back toward the docking bay. After a moment, Darren said, "We've had trouble before." It was not said with any particular weight. It was just said, the way someone states a fact about the weather or a ship system, true, noted, and not especially concerning. Ryle thought about Ritha's sitting room again, the warm food, the careful language, the way the word opportunity had sat in the room like furniture, comfortable-looking, solid, and then later, when the alliance offer came, the way it had turned out to be made of nothing at all. Hout's opportunity had been the same furniture, a different room, different upholstery, same emptiness inside. The difference, Ryle noticed, as they walked back through Oral's wide, neutral hallways, was that this time he had not been sitting in the room alone. That was a small difference, but it was the kind that mattered. He did not know yet exactly what word to put on what existed between himself and the Sable Heron's crew. It was not employment, or not only that. It was not friendship, or not only that. It was something he did not have a word for, possibly because the dragon languages he had grown up with did not have vocabulary for things that were freely given without transaction, and the other languages he had learned were trade languages, which were built around exchange. There might not be a word for it. He was beginning to think that was fine. Some things were real whether or not you had a name for them. On the ship, as they lifted off Oral Station and the way station's clean halls disappeared behind them, Ryle went to the cargo bay and sat for a while in the way he sometimes did after complex interactions, quietly letting things settle. Somewhere behind them, Councillor Hout was filing his contact report. Somewhere further behind, the Dragon Clan Council would receive it. He put that thought aside. Whatever came from it would come. He would deal with it when it arrived. He adjusted the wing brace on his left joint, where the meeting's tension had made the joint stiffen up a little. and let the ship's hum settle around him. The hail came through on a standard freight lane 3 weeks out from Oral, not an emergency frequency, not a trade channel. A diplomatic relay, formal encoding, the kind that the Dragon clans used when they wanted their communications to carry legal weight. The kind that got logged automatically in every system that received it and could be produced later as evidence if needed. Ryal was in the rear of the ship doing inventory on a medical cargo. They were moving to a colony outpost. He heard the comms tone change and recognized the encoding from the first 2 seconds of signal, the same way you recognize a particular voice even before the words begin. He set down the manifest reader and went forward. Sierra had already answered. She was holding the signal on standby, and when Ryal came in, she gave him a look that said, "This is yours to decide." He nodded. She released the standby. The signal was from an HFY vessel currently positioned at the edge of the freight lane sector. They identified themselves formally, Patrol Vessel, 3rd Rank, HFY Clan Authority. The message was delivered in the clipped, careful language of official clan communication. Ryal had been identified in Council contact records as an unaffiliated dragon operating in neutral space under no recognized clan jurisdiction. Under the Scalemount Accords, any dragon operating without clan affiliation in shared-use galactic space was subject to a status review by the nearest recognized clan authority. The Ashfang clan requested, formally, that Ryal return to Scalemount territory to clarify his status at the earliest convenience. They used the word requested. They did not use the word required. That gap was the whole argument, and everyone on the call understood it. Darren came out of the cockpit, where he had been listening through the open doorway. He looked at Ryal. "Do you want to go?" Ryal said no. Darren leaned over the comms panel and transmitted back, in plain trade tongue, that the requested party had heard the communication and was not available. He used the word available the same way the Ashfang had used requested, formally, neutrally, and very deliberately. The Ashfang vessel acknowledged the response. The channel closed. Then it followed them. For 4 days, the Ashfang patrol vessel sat at a consistent distance behind the Sable Heron, not close enough to be a physical threat, not far enough to pretend it was not there. It just stayed. Sierra ran trajectory calculations twice a day to confirm it was tracking their course changes. It was. She reported this information without visible emotion, the way she reported all technical information as facts that existed and needed to be known. Ryal did not find the following difficult to live with exactly, but he found it present in a way that was hard to set aside. It was the weight of being claimed without being wanted. Ashfang had not wanted him when he was there. Now that he was somewhere else, he was a jurisdiction question. He had become more useful as a legal problem than he had ever been as a person. He did not say this aloud. He thought it was too obvious to be worth saying. On the 5th day, the Sable Heron made a scheduled stop at a small supply point on the Moon Ashes Drift. It was a quiet place, the kind that barely qualified as a settlement. 3 dozen permanent residents, a rotating population of independent traders, a fuel depot, a supply market with 12 stalls, and the kind of sky that was wide and clear and not cluttered with the haze of heavy traffic. The Ashfang vessel dropped into a holding pattern in low orbit above the moon. It did not follow them to the surface. That was the line, apparently. It would watch, it would not land. Ryal went to the market to stretch his legs and help identify the specific components they needed from the supply stalls, because his eyes were better than human eyes at reading part numbers in low light, and the Drift's market ran under dim overhead panels that made Darren squint. He was reading a parts manifest at the 3rd stall when the old dragon sat down beside him. She did not make an event of it. She folded herself onto the low stone bench next to the stall the way old people sit, with the specific care of joints that have learned their limits, and she looked at the market the way you look at something you have seen many times and still find worth looking at. Her scales were the color of old copper, that particular shade between brown and green that only comes with age. She carried no bags. She wore no clan markings anywhere on her body, which, for a dragon her age, was unusual enough to notice. She said her name was Narrat, She said it without asking his name, which meant she already knew it. Ryle waited. She said she had been traveling alone for a long time. She said she had been in the area when the council reports went through the open relay. She did not explain how she had access to council relay reports, and he did not ask. Some things answer themselves if you wait long enough. She said she wanted to tell him something that had not been taught in the clan schools in 400 years, because 400 years ago the clans had decided it was no longer useful information. Before the current clan hierarchy solidified, she said, before the scale-mount accords and the formal strength rankings and the reckoning rituals, dragon lineages were not sorted by size and fire output. They were sorted by function. A clan needed fighters, yes, but it also needed other things. It needed those who could cross borders safely, those who could speak to strangers without threatening them, those who could think slowly and clearly across a long span of time, rather than quickly in the heat of a moment. The small-bodied dragons, the ones with lower flame pressure and narrower wingspans, had been specifically valued for the second kind of work. They were called the still flame line, not as an insult, as a title. The still flame was the one you could hold in a closed space without burning the walls, the one you brought into a room full of people who were afraid. The clans had stopped needing diplomats when the border wars started and kept going. War favored the large and the loud. The still flame line was not lost, but the knowledge of what it was had been quietly set aside and then quietly forgotten until people like Elder Voss looked at someone like Ryle and saw only what was missing because they no longer had words for what was there. Ryle sat very still while she said this, not because he was performing stillness, because he actually was still. He asked why she was telling him this now. She said she had been waiting to tell someone for a long time. She said she had watched the council situation from a distance, and she thought he might need to know it before things got more complicated. She said the Ashfang ship in orbit was not the last interested party he would deal with. He asked her what he should do with the information. She said that was not her question to answer. She got up from the bench with the careful movements of old joints, looked at the market one more time, and walked away between the stalls. He did not see which direction she went. He stood at the supply stall for a long time after that, holding the parts manifest, not reading it. When he got back to the ship, Darren was checking the fuel connection on the starboard side, and Sierra was inside running a systems check. Ryle sat down on the loading ramp and looked up at the clear sky of Asher's Drift, where the Ashfang ship was a barely visible shape in the orbital band if you knew where to look. Darren came around the side of the ship and sat down next to him on the ramp, not across from him, next to him, with the comfortable ease of someone who has run out of reasons to maintain distance. He did not ask what was wrong. He waited. Ryle told him about Narrat, all of it. The still flame line, the 400 years, what the small-bodied dragons had once been valued for, and why it had stopped. He told it plainly, the way he had learned to tell things on this ship, without performance. When he finished, there was a quiet that was not uncomfortable. The drift's air moved through it lightly. Then Darren said, "Still flame, that's not a bad name." Ryle said he did not know what to do with it yet. Darren said there was no hurry. Inside the ship, Sierra called from the cockpit that the systems check was done, and one of the cargo stabilizer mounts needed retensioning before the next leg, and could someone come look at it. They both got up. When the sable heron lifted off from Asher's Drift, Darren opened a channel to the Ashfang vessel in orbit. He did not transmit a formal response to their earlier request. He said, in the plain, direct tone he used for all practical communications, that Ryle was crew, that crew went where the ship went, and that if the Ashfang patrol wanted to track the sable heron's next 12 cargo runs across 6 different systems and 3 different galactic jurisdictions, they were welcome to do it, and he hoped they had good fuel reserves. The Ashfang vessel maintained its orbit for another hour as the sable heron moved away. Then it turned back towards Scale Mount territory and did not follow. The distress signal found them the way distress signals always find ships traveling the outer freight lanes, without warning, in the middle of something else entirely. Ryle was recalibrating the cargo bay temperature sensors, and Sierra was doing navigation math, and Darren was eating something cold that had been better when it was warm. And then the alert tone cut through all of it, and the signal filled the cabin. Grethani passenger transport, the Drell Sovereign, was losing containment on its secondary reactor housing. The breach had started small and compounded. They had 42 souls aboard, 12 medical staff on rotation to an outpost clinic, 8 researchers, and 22 civilian passengers, including several families. The ship's own repair systems had failed to isolate the breach. The reactor was venting heat and microparticulates into the main corridor. They had an estimated window of 30 to 40 minutes before the situation became irrecoverable. 3 ships were in range: the Sable Heron at approximately 14 minutes travel time, an Ashfang patrol vessel that had come back into the sector in the last few hours at around 20 minutes out, and a Council observer ship at 11 minutes, but smaller and with no heavy docking equipment. Darren had already changed course before the signal finished playing. He did not announce this decision or ask for input. He moved his hand, the heading changed, and then he said, "Sierra, run me a docking approach for a transport class that size with an active hull breach on the starboard midsection. Ryle, I need to know what you can do that I can't." The Council observer ship commed both the Sable Heron and the Ashfang vessel within 3 minutes of the signal to establish a response protocol. It used formal language. It talked about liability documentation and cross-jurisdictional response designation, and who would take primary medical responsibility once survivors were evacuated. It was not doing nothing, but it was not moving yet. The Ashfang vessel commed the Council ship back and began the protocol conversation. Ryle listened to both exchanges with one part of his attention, while the rest of it was focused on what Darren had asked him. He said he could work in vacuum for short periods, longer than any of them, but not indefinitely. He said his body heat was an asset if they needed to counteract cold exposure effects in evacuated passengers. He said his hands could apply significantly more pressure and force than any tool on the ship if manual hull work was needed. He said his tail had already proved its use in tight spaces. Sierra said, without looking up from the navigation math, that the transport's breach was on the starboard airlock frame. Based on the signal telemetry, the exterior frame had warped outward and the airlock door was no longer sealing. That was the primary problem. The docking clamps on the Sable Heron could stabilize the 2 ships together, but someone needed to hold the breech frame steady from the outside while the clamps were positioned, or the pressure differential would make controlled docking impossible. Working from outside, the ship meant working on the hull during active docking maneuvers with a reactor vent on the other side of the same vessel. Ryle said he could do that. Darren said, "You sure?" Ryle said yes. Darren said, "Then get a tether from the rear locker, the long one." By the time the Sable Heron reached the Drell Sovereign, the transport was visibly in trouble. The reactor vent was throwing a plume of heated gas in a cone from the midsection breach, not catastrophic yet, but worsening. The airlock frame on the starboard side had bent outward enough to be visible from approach, a seam of wrong geometry in a hull that was built to have none. Ryle went out through the external maintenance hatch with the long tether locked to his harness at 3 points. Sierra had calculated the approach angle, so the Sable Heron came in from the port side of the transport, giving Ryle a clear path across to the starboard airlock frame without crossing the reactor vent cone. He moved across the outer hull in the specific way that large bodies move in zero gravity when they have been living in confined spaces for several months and have learned exactly how much force each movement takes. He crossed to the transport's hull, locked his feet into the magnetic grip pads Sierra had pulled from the emergency kit and attached to his boots, and put both hands on the airlock frame. The frame wanted to move. The pressure differential from inside the transport was pushing it outward, and the reactor heat cycling through the hull was causing the metal to expand and shift in uneven pulses. Ryle set his grip, pushed back, and held it. He held it for 11 minutes. His left wing was extended for balance against the slow rotation of the two ships' relative positions. The joint was not built for sustained open extension in cold vacuum, and he could feel the exact moment when it moved from discomfort into pain, a clear line between the two, and he noted it and kept holding. Darren and Sierra ran the docking clamps from inside, the first clamp set, then the second, then the third. With the third clamp locked, the pressure differentials stabilized enough that the frame would hold without him. Ryle released the frame. He pulled himself back along the tether to the Sable Heron's hull. Everyone on the Drell Sovereign came off in the next 17 minutes. Families, researchers, medical staff, 12 of them were in early stages of thermal exposure from the corridor heat. All 42 were breathing, all 42 were alive. The Drell Sovereign's reactor went a full breach 6 minutes after the last person came off it. Ryle's left wing was bandaged in the cargo bay afterward by Sierra, who had the most medical knowledge of the three of them and who worked with the specific focused efficiency she brought to everything technical. She did not comment on how bad it was, which told Ryle it was fairly bad. He did not ask for a specific assessment. He sat where she put him and let her work. The families from the transport filled most of the cargo bay and the common area. A small child, Grethani, perhaps 4 years old by their developmental scale, had wandered back toward the cargo bay during the organized chaos of getting everyone settled, and was now standing a few feet from Ryle and looking at him with the complete open curiosity of someone who had not yet learned to be afraid of things just because they were large and unfamiliar. Ryle looked back at the child. The child pointed at his wing and said something in Grethani that his pendant translated as, "Does that hurt?" Ryle said, "A little bit." The child nodded, serious, and went back to the common area. The council observer ship, the Sable Heron, once everyone was aboard. The observer said the response had been logged, and the footage from all three ships' external systems had been captured and would be filed in the public record as part of the standard incident report. He said the council appreciated the crew's speed and efficiency. Then the Ashfang vessel commed, not the Sable Heron, Ryle directly. He answered. There was a pause on the other end that was long enough to mean something. Then Elder Ritha's voice. She sounded exactly as he remembered, controlled, measured, with that particular stillness that he had once mistaken for warmth and now understood was just precision. She said the footage had been seen. She said what he had done was on record in 3 systems simultaneously and would be in the Council's public archive before the day was done. She said the Ashfang clan had been reviewing his case, given the current diplomatic environment, and she believed the elders would be willing to revisit his standing. She said the clan might have been hasty. Ryle listened to all of it, then he was quiet for a moment. He said he was not interested in his standing. Ritha asked what he was interested in. He said he was crew. He closed the channel. The cargo bay was quiet except for the soft background sounds of the ship and the muffled voices of the Drell Sovereign's passengers settling in the common area. Ryle looked down at the bandaging on his wing. The joint would need a proper medical port in a few days. Sierra had already flagged the closest one on the route. Darren appeared in the cargo bay doorway. He leaned against the frame and looked at Ryle with the look that was not pity and was not admiration, just a clean, direct attention. The look that said, I see you and I am not making it into something other than what it is. He said that on Earth, a clan was just people who had decided they belonged to each other. No test for it, no threshold to pass, no elder to approve the decision, just the decision itself made between the people involved and then the living of it. Ryle asked if that was what this was. Darren said it seemed like it. From the cockpit, Sierra called back that the wing brace needed refitting before the next run, and if Ryle was finished being emotional about things, she had a departure window to calculate, and she needed someone to check the starboard fuel pressure because it had been reading slightly low since the docking maneuver. Ryle got up. He went to check the fuel pressure. The sable heron lifted off with its full cargo of survivors, heading toward the nearest colony with medical facilities. The council observer filed its report. The Ashfang vessel returned to Scalemount territory. The diplomatic relay went quiet. 3 crew, no clan markings, no allegiance flags, just a heading and a ship, and the particular kind of forward motion that comes from having somewhere real to be. The galaxy, in the way of large systems that move slowly, began to remember what had happened at the Drell Sovereign. Stories move differently than reports. Reports go into archives. Stories get told on docks and in transit lounges and in the common areas of ships on long runs. The story of the small dragon on the human hauler who held a warped airlock frame in open vacuum for 11 minutes while everyone else argued about protocol. The dragon clans did not speak his name in formal council sessions. But in the quiet conversations that happen after formal sessions end, in the moments between the official words, they spoke it. They had to, because what he had done in the footage that sat in the public record was not a small thing, and the old language had a word for it. A word that had not been used in 400 years. Still flame. The kind of fire that does not burn the room it is in. The kind that holds steady when everything else is moving. The kind that was never missing from him at all. It had just taken a ship with a dented hull and a human who was not impressed by the things that were supposed to impress people, to create the space where it could be seen.